with wheat flour or buckwheat flour, you can make your own noodles at home. That's no problem. And so udon are the wider noodles, taking a little longer to cook. There's what is called somen noodles, S-O-M-E-N. These are more like angel hair noodles, very quick cooking, more light noodles, like for summer. And then we have also what is called the soba noodles. And soba noodles are noodles that are made with some amount of buckwheat flour, either 100% buckwheat flour or more often 60-40, 60% wheat flour, 40% buckwheat flour, or 80-20, 80% wheat and 20% buckwheat. But for somebody who needs to be gluten-free, is anybody in this group gluten-free? You are. Okay, yeah. So then, of course, the 100% buckwheat noodles would be better than any wheat combination with the buckwheat. What else? The regular noodles, pasta, of course, can be used in the same way, but making sure usually that you don't get egg noodles. But if you buy the Italian regular noodles, those are just generally wheat noodles. Of course, in America, because it's usually white flour that then is enriched with other, with niacin and folic acid, etc., so and iron to bring the nutrients back in that they took out to begin with. And generally, the way to test whether the noodles are done, the best way to test it is to try them. Of course, when you take a noodle and you break it, if you have this as a cross-section of your udon noodle, if there is still a big white strip in the center, then you're sure that the center is not all the way cooked through. Because if it's whiter than the rest, it's just, the water didn't even get to the center. However, it doesn't mean when it's all clear, the same color, that it's all cooked, that it's well cooked. It may be overcooked at that point, so the best way is to test it. And some people like a little less cooked, some people like a little more cooked, so you'll have to figure out what you like best for you. Noodles and broth are really an easy, quick meal that you can easily extend into a full meal. If you put some tofu into the broth, you have your protein. If you add some greens at the very end, you have your greens. So you have greens, protein, with the broth all together, sort of like a one-pot meal. Not what I would suggest all the time, but once in a while. And it's, the broth, once you add soy sauce or tamari, it has more of a warming effect. If you add kuzu to the broth, it will have a long-term warming effect, because the kuzu, the starch, has more like a radiator effect. It keeps the heat longer, whereas a thin broth is more of a quick heat up and then also more quickly cool down. But very good for cooler weather in general, because it does warm you up if you eat it hot. Now for these 2 cups of broth that I have here, now the flame is on very low, and it's, the carrots are cooked enough as well. Usually for 2 cups I need 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. Or in other words, for 1 per cup of liquid, it's a teaspoon and a half. That's about an average amount of soy sauce. Of course, for you personally, you may vary that. Either you find it too salty or not salty enough, but the more salty you make it, of course, what happens when you eat something very salty? You become young, you become thirsty, and eating lots of sweets, or alcohol, or, something like that, right? You have cravings, that's right. Check on the noodles. Okay.
Going to be aromatic.
For my son, they need to be very al dente. For me, they need to be not so al dente, but not overcooked. But so al dente even then depends on what your tooth and taste calls for. As I said, my son's al dente is pretty hard to me. Can you cook them a little bit longer? I'll leave yours in. Okay. Now normally I would just pour the water through the strainer into the sink, but that is not happening right here, so what I'm going to do is I'm taking the noodles out like this, simply because I don't want all the water in the bowl. And then I'm taking cold water to rinse my noodles well, because if I don't rinse them with cold water, when I let them sit like that, it will be one sticky mass. But even if that happened, you can still wash them again and they'll loosen up a little bit. So the soy sauce you only add at the very last moment, simmering it only for about 3 to 5 minutes. And then if you wanted to make, let's make a little bit of a bowl.
And these are whole wheat?
These ones are whole wheat, yes. Or mostly whole wheat. I think there's some white flour in these. And here we have our noodles and broth. Very simply, and of course you can, as I said, put more into that, make it with tofu or something else. Put some, steam some fish or cook some fish in the broth as well, instead of having tofu in there. That's another way of having some protein in there.